The fog rolls in thick, curling around the carved dragon head of the Viking ship. Wood creaks. Sails flap. Salt air stings the eyes. Somewhere beyond the mist, land waits forests untouched, hills unseen, a continent unclaimed by the world that today then lulled that sails toward it. This is not the promised coast of Greenland. The air smells different, warmer, wilder. No one speaks. Only the oars dip and rise, like the breath of something ancient awakening, centuries before Columbus ever set foot on his wooden decks. Someone else had already crossed the ocean, but not by compass and map. By instinct, by whispers, by memory passed from one weather-beaten face to the next. Leif Erikson didn't stumble. He searched. Subscribe to the video sharing channel to follow this forgotten voyage and others like it. Quietly buried beneath dust and time, Leif's ship had no name, no carved letters to bind it in history. It had stories instead. Long before the voyage west, Leif grew up hearing them. Tales of monsters in the sea, of islands made of ice, of men who turned into wolves. Childhood among the Vikings wasn't childhood in the way it's known now. It was training. It was repetition. It was watching firelight flicker across a blade and knowing it might someday spill blood or carve a future. Born around 970 A.D., likely in Iceland, Leif was the son of Eric the Red, a man more dangerous than his beard was red. Eric's temper was infamous. He was exiled from Norway for murder, then exiled again from Iceland for the same. Wherever Eric went, trouble followed. But he didn't just leave ashes behind. He founded Greenland. Not a metaphor, he literally named a frozen rock Greenland to trick settlers into joining him. It worked. Leif was raised among the ice-locked farms and drifting glaciers of this strange, stubborn colony. There, the boy learned to read the sea like a book, no formal school. The sagas were his curriculum, the wind his textbook, and the longhouse elders his professors. His hands calloused early. His laugh came rarely. His mind wandered often, especially when the horizon glowed faintly in the west. Some claimed the glow was nothing. Aurora, perhaps. Trick of the eyes. But others whispered of a sailor who'd once gone too far and saw trees bigger than anything in Greenland, land where grapes grew wild. These rumors drifted like snowlight, silent and hard to chase. Still, Leif listened. He remembered that by his early 20s, he was already known in Greenland as more than just Eric's son. He was calm where his father raged, measured where Eric roared. And yet there was a hunger in him, a curiosity sharper than any sword. It showed in the way he repaired ships, always tinkering with the balance, reshaping the hull, asking questions no one else dared. It showed when he stared out to sea too long, even when storms were coming. Then came the invitation from Norway. King Olaf Tryggvason wanted to see this young Greenlander for himself. Perhaps it was politics, perhaps it was faith. Olaf, a fierce Christian king, was bent on converting the entire North. Whatever the reason, Leif sailed east, leaving behind his frozen home and father's shadow. Norway was a different world, warmer, wetter, crowded with people who wore silk and feared different gods. Leif met Olaf at court. The king spoke of salvation, of heaven, of one true God. He offered Leif gifts, hospitality, respect. In return, he wanted loyalty, and belief. Leif converted. He was baptized, given holy books, and taught the prayers. Historians still debate whether this was genuine faith or diplomatic survival. Either way, Olaf made him promise something more: carry Christianity to Greenland, become a bridge between the old gods and the new. Leif accepted. He left Norway with more than just religion. He returned with cargo, priests, a new understanding of the world, and stories, always stories. In port towns, around fires, drunk sailors sometimes spoke of places past the sea ice, where the wind changed smell, where the stars shifted, where forests breathed and berries bled juice on your fingers. The most persistent tale came from Bodny Herjolfsson, a merchant who, years earlier, had gotten lost in fog. When it cleared, he saw a wooded coast. He didn't land. He turned back. But his mistake, if it was a mistake, lingered. Leif remembered that, by now, he was no longer just a dreamer. He was a leader. Greenland's winters were long. Its wood was scarce, its people tired. A new land, if it truly existed, could change everything. And so, preparations began. He chose a crew. Not warriors, exactly. More like brave fools and loyal. Friends, sailors who feared neither sea monsters nor starvation. The ship, his father's old Nair, was repaired, reinforced, and loaded with supplies. No flag, no fanfare. Just quiet purpose. The route would be brutal. Past the ice shelf, through the northern currents, into the unknown. But Leif believed. And belief, sometimes, is all the map you need. Snowmelt seeps through sod walls in early spring, and the longhouse smells of damp fur and dried fish. Outside, seagulls scream over the fjord, and the tide gnaws at the shore like a hungry dog. The ship is ready. There's no ceremony, no carved runes, no omens cast. Just a few nods and the soft thump of boots on wooden planks. The crew climbs aboard. Each man carries silence more than weapons. They aren't warriors going to battle. They're shadows chasing a rumor. The sail catches the wind with a snap. Greenland fades behind them, white and distant. The sea ahead is cold, fierce, indifferent. It swells and groans like a sleeping beast. Leif Erikson stands at the prow. Eyes fixed forward, no words. Just wind, water, and the endless riddle of the western horizon. They sail for weeks. Fog drapes across the water like burial linen. Stars vanish. Time stretches. One day blurs into the next. Then land, jagged and gray. Helluland rises from the waves like the spine of some buried creature. The name comes later, land of flat. Stones. They find no trees, only boulders stacked by nature or perhaps something older. It feels wrong, too quiet. The wind moans through the rocks. Shadows move strangely. Snow still clings to corners, though it's early summer. And then there are the foxes. White, unblinking, unafraid. They circle the camp at night. No growls, no barking, just stares. One tries to steal dried fish, then disappears behind a stone like smoke. The men grow uneasy. Fire doesn't seem to warm them here. The cold bites deeper than usual. And the echoes bounce too far. Come back too late. They don't stay long. There's no wood, no food, no reason. They set sail again. Southward. This time the coast softens. Trees begin to appear tall, dark, ancient. They reach another land. The logs creak as they anchor near shore. Pine needles drift in the air. The ground feels rich underfoot, a strange sensation after years of rock and ice. Leif names it Markland, forest land. The trees are unlike any in Greenland, thicker, denser, almost too quiet. Birds scatter as the crew walks inland. There's game to hunt, but no signs of people. Just wind through branches and the occasional crack of something unseen moving far beyond sight. They cut timber, enough for shelter and future ships. But again, something feels unsettled. Even the dogs refuse to stray far from the fires. One morning, a man finds a circle of stones near the tree line that no one remembers building. He kicks it apart. That night, the trees seem to move closer. They leave again. Still further south, the air warms. The sea changes color and the birdsong shifts. The coastline glows with a strange softness. Grapes, actual grapes, hang from vines near the shore. Wild wheat grows in clearings. Deer roam slowly. Unafraid. The men cheer. Some fall to their knees, gathering berries like treasure. Others begin building shelters. The ship is beached and repurposed as timber. Vinland. A name born from vines and wonder. They stay longer this time, settle in, map the nearby streams. Fish the rivers, hunt the woods. The nights are calm and the stars seem closer. But not everything is peaceful. At dusk, lights shimmer above the hills, green, pink, blue. Not northern lights, not exactly. They pulse, flicker, vanish. One man swears he saw a figure standing beneath them, tall, thin, watching. Another claims he heard music, too rhythmic to be wind. Still, life continues. They dry meat, store grapes, patch clothes with seal sinew. They laugh more often now. Jokes about Markland's silent trees and Helluland's ghost foxes become nightly stories. Leif listens but says little. He records the changes in his mind: soil color, bird species, berry flavor. He's not here for gold or conquest. He's here to understand. One afternoon, a man brings back a stone with carvings on it. Not Norse, not runes, something older. It's passed around, then quietly buried under a tree. Historians still debate whether these carvings were indigenous markings or natural formations. No proof survives. Just the story. One morning, Leif walks alone along a stream and finds a broken arrowhead flint, not metal. No one in the crew made it. He says nothing. That night, a fire is built higher than usual. Another week passes. The weather begins to shift. Autumn creeps in. The wind returns with teeth. Leif begins to count days. Supplies are checked. The ship is retarded. Some want to stay. Most do not. When the sails rise again, Vinland fades into mist, just as it had appeared. They carried timber, grapes, dried meat, and stories. Always stories. Greenland greets them not with fanfare, but silence. Ice has returned to the fjords. The longhouse doors grown open. Children point at the ship's wooden ribs, laden with dark planks from forests they'll never see. Elders gather near the shore, blinking at the richness of color, the red of dried berries, the golden wheat, The strange soft leather from a deer no one can name. Leif says little. He never brags. He simply shows them what he brought. But word spreads faster than sails catch. Soon, everyone knows. Leif Erikson found new land across the ocean. Not a myth, not just the sailor's tale of Bodne Hajolfsson. Real trees, real grapes, real rivers with fish that glitter like silver in the Firelight. No coins are minted. No statues are raised. Still, they call him Leif the Lucky. The name sticks. Winter creeps in, and with it come the stories. Some are true, others mutate, grow wings. Leif hears a version where he slayed a sea serpent with an axe. Another where he found a city made of gold. He doesn't correct them. What matters is this: the path has been made, and now others want to walk it. The first is Thorvald Eriksson, Leif's brother. He burns with a fire their father would have admired. Less patient, more proud. Thorvald hears Leif's stories and decides not to return to Vinland, but to conquer it. Not just timber and berries, but people, land, legacy. He takes a crew, sails the same path, reaches the same shores. At first, everything seems familiar. The same rivers, the same fields, the same quiet. But then the arrows come. Thorvald is struck during a skirmish near the edge of the forest. A single arrow pierces his side. He tells his men he wishes to be buried there in the land they found, so they dig. A rough cross marks the grave. They return without him. Word arrives by spring. Greenland grieves quietly. The same people who once saw Vinland as salvation now speak of it in hushed tones. Not cursed, not haunted, but dangerous, wild. Yet that doesn't stop others. Bodne returns not to explore, but to trade. Others follow. A small wave of Norse attempts begin. Some ships vanish. Some return half empty. A few settle briefly, then vanish from the sagas. One attempt stands out. Freydis Eriksdotter, Leif's half-sister, sails with a party that fractures into infighting and bloodshed. The story varies. Some say she killed 5 men with an axe while pregnant. Others say she simply stood her ground during a panic. Historians still debate the truth. But Freydis returns. Angry, alive, alone, and after her, fewer follow. Vinland remains. The coastline doesn't move. The grapes still grow. But the attempts thin out like the mist that once wrapped Leif's ship. It becomes clear that while the Vikings reached the New World, they could not hold it. There were no reinforcements from Norway, no steady supply chains, no strong alliances with the native peoples. Just wind, hope, and wooden boats in hostile waters. Leif doesn't return to Vinland. His mission was never conquest, just curiosity. He remains in Greenland, becomes a leader, introduces Christianity, builds churches, raises a family, lives quietly. But he always remembers the forest, the foxes, the lights in the night sky. So do others. Even in death, Eric the Red scoffed at Leif's conversion to Christianity. Yet the son outlived the father, outlasted the blade, outran the legend. Some say he died around the year 1020. No saga describes the moment. No battle. Just time doing what swords couldn't. Still, his name lingered like smoke over water. Vinland faded from maps. The world moved on. But for those few years, a young Greenlander rewrote what was possible. Centuries later, ships with taller masts and painted flags would sail those same coasts, unaware that Norse boots had already pressed into that soil. Columbus would be praised, sculpted, celebrated, maps redrawn in his name. But long before his ships crossed the Atlantic, Leif Erikson had already been there and gone. Still, the world forgot in the centuries after Leif's death. The sagas continued. Passed from mouth to mouth, carved into memory, they told of his voyage to Vinland. But outside of Iceland and Greenland, few believed them. Scholars in Europe dismissed the tales as fantasy. How could northern wanderers cross an entire ocean without compasses, without kings backing them, without leaving behind great monuments? But some kept listening. The sagas spoke of Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. They described strange animals, long days, and wild forests. And though the names were poetic, the descriptions bore truth. Yet for hundreds of years, that truth slumbered beneath skepticism. Then came 1960. In the windswept edges of Newfoundland, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad, followed the sagas like a treasure map. Locals spoke of strange mounds at a place called Lands-O Meadows, earth-covered ridges, half-rotted timber. Digging began, and what they found changed everything. Longhouses, iron nails, Norse-style artifacts, carbon-dated wood matching life's era. Not legend, not story, not hope. Evidence. Suddenly, Leif wasn't just a name in a dusty saga. He had weight, place, proof. Historians still debate whether Lands-O Meadows was Vinland itself or just a northern outpost. Some argue Vinland lay further south, closer to modern-day New England. Others claim it was more metaphor than map, a symbol of freedom, not a fixed location. But all agree on one thing now. The Vikings reached North America around the year 1000. 5 centuries before Columbus. The site has since become a UNESCO World Heritage location. And yet, few outside the history world know Leif's name. The irony? The Norse were likely the first Europeans to make contact with indigenous peoples in the Americas, though unlike later empires, their encounters didn't involve empire building. Cities burned or gold mined. At Lands-O Meadows, there's no evidence of war. Just a workshop, a forge, a home, a quiet attempt. Back in the sagas, one detail stands out. They say Leif rescued men from a wrecked ship on his return from Vinland, men who would have died in the ice. Because of this, some claimed his good luck came not from the voyage, but from saving lives. It's a small moment, but it lingers. In the vast world of conquerors and kings, Leif stood apart. He didn't go west to rule. He went to learn. He was the son of exile, raised on the edge of the world, and he passed through that final veil of fog not with fire but with curiosity. And that may be the rarest kind of bravery. Fires crackle low in Greenland's longhouses. The elders tell stories to children whose eyes grow wide in the flicker of torchlight. They speak of Leif's voyage as if it happened yesterday, not seasons ago. But beyond these cold shores, the story begins to fade. The medieval world isn't ready to remember him. Europe, in the centuries that follow, turns its gaze elsewhere, toward cathedrals rising and empires clashing, toward gold and gospel and conquest. Leif's story is left behind in the sagas, buried beneath Latin chronicles and royal proclamations. In the Norse lands, however, his name endures. Whispers remain in the corners of libraries and old stone churches. The Icelandic sagas are copied by handbooks filled with dragons, ghosts, and real explorers. Leif's journey lies between lines of myth and truth. And for those willing to listen closely, it never stops echoing. But still, no monuments, no holidays, just wind and memory, until one day, Leif Erikson becomes American, strange, perhaps, but true, in the 19th century. As waves of Scandinavian immigrants arrive in the United States, many bring their history with them. Norway, Sweden, Iceland, these are people who carry sagas like family heirlooms. To them, Leif isn't just a character from a dusty tale. He's kin. In cities like Boston, Chicago, and Minneapolis, statues go up. Viking ships are carved from wood and paraded through streets. Bearded men in horned helmets, historically inaccurate but theatrical, march proudly. In 1893, at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, a full-scale replica of a Viking ship named the Viking is sailed across the Atlantic from Norway. It's a quiet defiance. We were here first. The movement grows. Poets write odes to Leif. Historians push back against the Columbus legend. Norwegian Americans lobby for recognition. In 1925, President Calvin Coolidge acknowledges Leif Erikson as the discoverer of America in a public statement. Still, no National Day. Not yet. That comes later. In 1964, following decades of effort from Scandinavian American communities, the United States Congress authorizes the President to proclaim October 9th as Leif Erikson Day. It's not a federal holiday. No fireworks, no school closings. But it's official. Why October 9th? Not Leif's birthday. Not the day he landed. Just the date the first Norwegian immigrants arrived in New York in 1825. Symbolic, quiet, like Leif himself. Today, Leif's memory is split across oceans. In Norway, he's a national figure. In Iceland, he's remembered with respect. In Greenland, his memory lingers like a shadow over the fjords. In America, his story is a footnote, brief, misunderstood, but not forgotten. And in Newfoundland, on the edge of the world, a grassy hill hides the remains of a Norse camp. Visitors walk slowly between reconstructed longhouses. The wind whistles. The trees creak. And if they close their eyes, they might hear it, the sails, the surf, the voice of a young explorer watching a new world emerge through fog. Historians still debate the exact path he took, whether he followed Bjadnes' course perfectly or drifted further south. Some even argue that Vinland might lie near Cape Cod or further inland. But the exact coordinates don't matter anymore. The journey does. Leif wasn't chasing riches or territory. He was following a whisper, a rumor of warmth beyond the cold, of green beyond the white, of life beyond what anyone dared believe possible. And when his ship cracked through that final wave, and the fog parted, he became something rare. In history, not a conqueror, not a king, not even a martyr, just a witness. When the sagas were finally written down in the 13th century, over 200 years had passed since Leif's voyage. By then, memories had softened, embellishments had crept in. What began as testimony slowly turned into legend. And legends, as always, carry more questions than answers. The saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red both tell of Leif's journey, but not in perfect agreement. One says he stumbled upon Vinland while trying to return to Greenland. The other, insists he set out with purpose, following tales told by Bjarni Herjolfsson. Historians still debate which version, if either, is closer to the truth, but between the lines, something remains steady. Leif reached the shores of North America. He explored them. He returned. And he inspired others to try. The sagas also tell of other voyages. Thorvald, Freydis, and Thorfinn Karlsefni all attempted to settle Vinland. Thorfinn's expedition especially stands out. He led a large group, including women, livestock, and tools for farming. It was no longer exploration, it was colonization. They built houses. They traded with indigenous peoples. They fought, sometimes. One woman, Gudrid, even gave birth to a child on Vinland's soil, Snorri, said to be the first European born in the New World. But the settlement didn't last. The sagas speak of Skrallings, the Norse term for the native peoples. The settlement didn't last. The sagas speak of Skrallings, the Norse term for the native peoples. The word is debated. Perhaps it meant screamers, referring to battle cries. Perhaps something else. The Vikings traded with them at first, offering red cloth and milk. But tension soon followed. Misunderstandings, perhaps. Or fear. One day, a bull broke loose and charged through the settlement, startling the natives. Relations fractured. Arrows flew. Blood was spilled. And like a dream disturbed by noise, the settlers woke to the truth. They weren't alone, and they weren't welcome. They left. One by one, the expeditions dwindled. The North Atlantic grew colder during the Little Ice Age. Ships became harder to launch. Greenland's own colony began to fade, trapped between cold, distance, and isolation. Eventually, no one returned to Vinland, and so the land was left in peace. Centuries passed. Trees grew over camps. Fires went out. Bones turned to dust. And the stories became softer, more uncertain, until they barely whispered at all. In the 21st century, archaeologists continue to search for more sites like Lonso Meadows. Satellite scans, ground-penetrating radar, and soil analysis have revealed possible Norse presence further south. One site in particular, at Point Rosy in Newfoundland, sparked global excitement. A shadow under the grass, a discoloration of the earth. Was it a forge, a farm, or just a trick of time? Excavations began. Findings were inconclusive, some iron traces, some stones. But not enough. Historians still debate whether there are more settlements to be found, or if Lonso Meadows was the only one. Some believe more lies buried, just out of reach. Others argue that the Norse presence was always brief, always transient, never meant to leave deep roots. But Leif's journey was never about permanence. He didn't plant flags. He didn't write laws. He didn't carve his name into trees. Arrived, he saw. He remembered. And in remembering, he gave the world something that even maps can't fully show, proof that courage doesn't always look like conquest. Sometimes it looks like curiosity, not in a world filled with swords and fire. Leif chose discovery. In a time when men measured worth by how much they could take. He was remembered for what he found, and what he left untouched. The longhouses are gone now, the grapevines wild. The winds still howl down the coast of Newfoundland, as they always have. But somewhere beneath the moss and the soil, the echoes of footsteps still linger. They don't call out loudly. They simply wait, like the stories themselves. The sea that Leif Erikson crossed was more than an obstacle. It was a living, breathing force. The North Atlantic doesn't forgive mistakes. Its waves swallow ships whole. Its fog blinds the most experienced sailors. Yet somehow, over 1,000 years ago, a wooden nair carried a crew safely from Greenland to the shores of North America. That alone would be a miracle to some, but for the Norse, the sea wasn't just danger, it was home. From the fjords of Norway to the cliffs of Iceland and the frozen coasts of Greenland, Norse culture was shaped by salt water and storms. Children learned to row before they could read. Longships weren't just tools, they were lifelines. Designed for flexibility, shallow enough to sail upriver, strong enough to face the open sea. The very vessels that carried them to Vinland were technological marvels of their time. And Leif's ship, it wasn't large, around 50 feet long, open deck. No compass, no anchor chain. Navigation depended on sunstones, stars, wind direction, sea color, and the behavior of birds. 1,000 small signals read like runes carved into water. It's easy to forget now how unlikely that success really was. Modern sailors use GPS and radar. They still get lost. But Leif found a continent without either. That part of the story rarely gets told. Even today, most people imagine Vikings as raiders. Axes, horns, burning monasteries. But the truth is broader. They were also traders, explorers, settlers. They mapped coastlines, named places, adapted. The same people who once sacked Paris also built farms in Greenland and tried to grow grapes in Vinland. There's an odd detail in the sagas that often gets overlooked. One version claims that when Leif's men first explored Vinland, they accidentally left a kettle on the fire, wandered off, and returned to find it melted. The implication? The metal wasn't suited for the heat of the southern sun. It sounds ridiculous. And yet, it might contain a grain of truth. The Norse were used to cold climates. Their tools, their methods, even their clothing were designed for frost and snow. In Vinland, they encountered a different world, a place with fertile soil, broad rivers, and a climate alien to their bones. They were explorers stepping into someone else's season. Historians still debate the real extent of their contact with indigenous peoples. The sagas describe conflict, yes, but also curiosity. The Norse noted skin color, clothing, canoes. They observed, described, but didn't fully understand. The same way the land itself confused them. They wanted to claim it, but it wouldn't be claimed. There's something humbling about that. Leif's journey reminds us that not every discovery ends with dominance. Not every explorer needs a crown. Sometimes the world simply opens for a moment, shows what lies beyond the fog, then closes again, and those who witness it are changed forever. Back in Greenland, Leif built one of the first churches. A simple wooden structure, not grand or gilded. He lived as a chieftain, gave shelter, solved disputes. He rarely spoke of Vinland publicly after the voyage, perhaps because it was sacred to him, or perhaps because words could never quite capture what he saw. Years passed, the world shifted, empires rose and fell, and still his name remained a footnote until a buried forge in Newfoundland lit the memory again. 1,000 years. That's how long it took for proof to catch up with story.in. The end. The mystery isn't why Leif's voyage was forgotten. It's how it survived it all. 1,000 years is a long time for a story to wander in the dark, and yet the name Vinland never quite disappeared. It lingered in the sagas, surfacing like driftwood during long winters in Icelandic halls, passed from father to son, whispered. Near hearthfires, it remained fragile but unbroken. And in those scattered syllables, Helluland, Markland, Vangland lay the outline of something incredible, a map before maps, a truth wrapped in poetry. For centuries, scholars dismissed it. Europe, in its medieval pride, could not imagine that unkempt Norsemen pagans, farmers, herders might have touched the New World long before Columbus, long before caravels and compasses. And so, the sagas were reclassified as literature, not history. Myths, not records. Entertaining, yes, but not to be believed. Still, some believed anyway. In the 1700s, a few daring antiquarians began to question the official narrative. They read the saga of the Greenlanders not as allegory, but as testimony. They studied sailing distances, examined wind patterns, and argued that the descriptions matched the real geography of northeastern Canada. Their voices were quiet, often ignored. Then came archaeology, and with it, something the sagas never had before: evidence, iron nails, carbon-dated timber, bone needles, and fragments of tools, each a whisper from the past, each confirming what words alone could not. At Lonzo Meadows, one artifact in particular caught attention: a bronze cloak pin, fashioned in classic Norse style. Small, unassuming, but it shouldn't have been there. It was like finding a Viking coin in a Florida sandbox, out of place, out of time. And yet, it was there. Even skeptics had to blink. From that moment, Leif Erikson's name shifted again. From legend to pioneer, from ghost to man. Still, for many, the idea of Vikings in America seems like an accidental footnote, a brief detour before history really began. After all, no cities were built. No colonies survived. There were no permanent marks etched into the land. But perhaps that's the point. Leif's journey wasn't about permanence. It was about reach. A moment where one world brushed fingertips with another. A moment so quiet, so fleeting, that it vanished almost without a sound. The sagas mentioned the grapes of Vinland again and again. Not because grapes were rare, but because they were impossible. In Greenland, the soil was hard, the seasons short. Grapes didn't grow. So to find vines tangled in wild abundance must have felt like finding treasure. One night, according to the saga of Eric the Red, Leif's men drank too much of that wild juice. They sang loud, danced barefoot in the grass, and passed out under foreign stars. The next morning, one man claimed he dreamed of a white bear teaching him songs. Another found a feather stuck to his cheek. Details like these stretch belief, but they also remind us that the Norse weren't just explorers, they were people. They got drunk, they lost boots in the mud, they sang off-key. They carved names into tree bark and then forgot where they left their knives. Vinland wasn't a conquest. It was a campsite, a glimpse, and in that way, perhaps more valuable than all. The gold Spain later stole from the Aztecs. Historians still debate how far Leif traveled. Some believe he reached as far south as New Brunswick or Nova Scotia. Others argue for Cape Cod, but all agree the voyage required extraordinary skill and even more, Imagination to sail into the unknown, to find land not drawn on any map. To trust the fog and the wind more than any guide. That is not just exploration. It is wonder. And wonder, once awakened, doesn't easily sleep again. In the halls of modern history, Leif Erikson often stands quietly in the background, his story overshadowed by louder, later figures. Yet among scholars, cartographers, and those who still believe that the wind carries memory, his voyage holds a strange, unshakable weight. He discovered nothing in the way the word is often used. No flags planted, no cities founded, no armies deployed. And still, what he found bent the edges of the known world, even if it took centuries for anyone to notice. There's a strange contradiction at the heart of the Vinland story. The Norse found the New World, yes, but the New World, in return, rejected them. They were not equipped to stay. The grapes spoiled. The winters still bit deep. The forest grew back faster than they could cut it. And the native peoples, rightfully, wary resisted any attempt to claim what was never offered. So instead of expansion, the story ends with retreat. The settlements didn't fail through violence alone. They faded from within, men tired of the distance. Supplies ran thin. Homesickness took root deeper than any tree. And yet, Leif's legacy wasn't one of failure. It was of possibility. He had shown the way. What others did with that knowledge was beyond his control. One of the more curious facts about Leif's story is that it includes no final battle, no noble death, no dramatic conclusion. His life slips from the record as quietly as it entered it. A few lines in the sagas mark his last years. A passing mention of a son, a note that he ruled as chieftain, no cause of death, no burial site, no last words. Historians still debate where he died, Greenland or Iceland, perhaps Norway during a return voyage. But nothing conclusive has ever been found. For a man who crossed an ocean, he left remarkably few footprints. That may be the most Viking thing about him. The Norse were a people who traveled farther than their maps could reach. From Constantinople to Baghdad, from the Black Sea to the White Sea, and across the Atlantic to Vinland, often with no intention to rule, just to see, to understand. To say they had been there and returned. Sometimes, that was enough. And still, there are unanswered questions. Why did Leif never return to Vinland? Was it caution? A promise to Greenland's people? Or had he found what he was looking for and knew when to let it go? One theory suggests he saw no future there, that the hardships outweighed the rewards, that the costs, physical, spiritual, human, were too steep. Another theory argues he always meant to go back, but life got in the way. Leadership, family, age. Perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is that he went, and because he did, the world expanded, if only by a shadow's width. In the great tide of history, not all achievements crash like waves. Some ripple quietly, gently touching distant shores. Vinland was one of those ripples. It didn't change everything, but it changed enough. The long winters of Greenland leave time for thinking. Time to stare at the ice-crusted horizon and wonder what lies beyond it. Time to remember. In the final years of Leif Erikson's life, Vinland must have returned to him often. Not in grand, sweeping memories, but in fragments. The sharp scent of crushed grapes, the thick silence of those unfamiliar woods, the smooth feel of a riverstone warmed by the sun. The sky wider than any he'd seen before. There is no record of his thoughts, of course. No diary, no memoir. The Norse left behind sagas, not journals. Their history was meant to be spoken, not written. And what wasn't spoken vanished. But one can imagine, not the proud boasting of a conqueror, but something quieter. A man sitting by a hearth, watching his children play. A slow smile when someone asks about the wooden beam in the ceiling, and he replies that it once came from a forest far across the sea. The wood, darker than Greenland's, denser, warmer. To the touch, some of it likely still rests in the beams of old longhouses, mistaken as local timber. The legacy of Leif wasn't carved in stone. It was built into homes, woven into stories, tucked into the folds of old women's songs and the questions of wide-eyed boys. Still, even as Leif's name softened into folklore, the world was changing. To the south, Europe stirred. Empires grew. The Catholic Church reached farther. Trade routes thickened with spices, silk, and war. In time, the age of exploration would rise names like Magellan, Dama, Vespucci, and yes, Columbus filling textbooks with curved lines and painted sails. But none of them had come first. Even now, many maps and minds begin the story of the tent. New World in 1492, not because that's when it started, but because that's when it was recorded with certainty. Leif's voyage, on the other hand, existed in the margins, in oral traditions, in landscapes remembered more in sensation than measurement. And yet, in some ways, that makes it more profound. Columbus sailed with the backing of monarchs, a contract of wealth, and the certainty of return. Leif sailed with stories and stars. He did not seek gold or slaves or empire. He sought land. Not to own, but to find. There's a moment described in the sagas when Leif's crew walks the shores of Vinland and simply listens. No axes, no maps, just silence, broken only by birdsong and wind. And for a people used to the roar of the sea and the howl of northern winds, that silence must have felt sacred. Historians still debate what happened to the Norse who came after. Whether any stayed longer than the sagas admit. Whether they intermarried. Left behind children, names, words. Some point to archaeological anomaly structures in Maine, markings in stone, tools in odd places. Others dismiss them as fantasy, misinterpretation, or fraud. But it's hard to ignore the idea that perhaps, somewhere in the vast forests of North America, long before the Mayflower ever drifted close, the faint echo of Old Norse once whispered through the trees. And then faded, not erased, not failed. Just done. Leif never claimed Vinland. He never ruled it, but he walked it. And he returned with proof. Timber. Grapes. And the truth that the world was larger than anyone had dared imagine. The truth, once known, has a strange way of resurfacing, even after centuries of doubt. The memory of Leif Erikson kept circling the edges of Western consciousness like a ship hovering just beyond sight. And when it finally returned, dragged back into light by archaeologists and scholars, it carried with it a question few dared to ask. Why was this story hidden so long? Some say timing. When Columbus's voyage was embraced as a national myth, there was no room for another explorer. His story offered a clean, heroic narrative: sponsorship, discovery, legacy. Leif's tale, on the other hand, was colder, rougher, full of gaps and guesses. There were no royal proclamations for Leif, no flags, just a wooden boat, a few men, and the whisper of land ahead. Too quiet for textbooks, too uncertain for monuments, and yet it endured. Part of that is thanks to the sagas. The saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red are not perfect histories. They contradict each other. They insert omens, dreams, and questionable timelines. One even credits Leif's discovery of Vinland to divine intervention. Storm pushing him off course as punishment or blessing. Historians still debate which saga is more accurate. Some argue both were stitched together from older oral traditions warped by centuries of retelling. Others believe they were political tools designed to glorify certain families, downplay others. Still, between the exaggerations, truth remains. The structure of the longhouses uncovered at Lonzo Meadows matches the layouts described in the sagas. Even the detail of turf walls insulated with layers of soil and grass aligns perfectly. The site wasn't guessed. It was remembered. That's the remarkable part. For all their flaws, the sagas worked. They guided archaeologists across oceans and centuries to the right patch of earth. How many ancient stories can say the same? Leif's journey also forces a shift in how we think about exploration. We often imagine the great explorers as ambitious, driven by conquest or glory. But Leif doesn't fit that mold. He wasn't a conquistador. He didn't chase spices or gold. He wasn't even the first to see Vinland. The title belongs to Bodni Herjulfsson. But where Bjarni saw and turned back, Leif stepped ashore. He took the risk. He brought the knowledge home. There's an old Norse phrase that translates roughly to, "Better to go and fail than never to leave the shore." Leif understood that. And perhaps that's why his story, even after being buried for centuries, has such quiet power. Not because of what he claimed, but because of what he dared. In today's world, we look back and try to chart the voyage in miles and latitudes. We plug his route into satellite maps and calculate wind drift and current strength. We reduce the mystery to data, but Leif didn't sail with coordinates. He sailed with questions. What's beyond the mist? What lies past the known? And most importantly, can we return to tell the tale? Some legacies leave behind castles or crowns. Others leave behind stories that travel farther than any ship. Leif Erikson's legacy is one of those. And in the strangest of ways, it continues to grow, not through conquest, but through curiosity. Not through monuments, but through echoes. Across Scandinavia, his name has long been spoken with quiet pride. In Norway, statues were erected in Bergen and Trondheim. In Iceland, a towering bronze Leif gazes out over Reykjavik, windstruck and unbowed. And in Greenland, near the ruins of Brattahlid, the site of his childhood home, the land still seems to lean toward the sea. But it's in America where Leif's story took its oddest turn. In the early 1900s, Scandinavian immigrant communities began to push back against the dominant Columbus narrative. For them, Leif was more than just a distant explorer. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that history had many sides and that their own people had once crossed oceans in search of something new. In 1929, a statue of Leif was placed in Boston, gazing westward. Another followed in Milwaukee, a third in Seattle. Each city claimed him in its own way, as a quiet hero less flashy than Columbus, less brutal than the conquistadors, but just as bold. And in Minnesota, Leif's name is stitched into schools, parks, churches, and libraries. It's not revisionism. It's restoration. Even so, Leif Erikson, Day October 9th, remains modest. It passes quietly each year, with a few speeches, a scattering of articles, and the occasional sailboat reenactment. No parades, no fireworks, but maybe that's fitting, because Leif's journey wasn't loud. It wasn't even meant to be remembered. It simply happened, and someone noticed. What draws people to his story today isn't grandeur. It's the mystery, the softness, the space it leaves open for imagination. Historians still debate the scope of his influence. Some argue the Norse expeditions to Vinland left little behind and mattered little in the long sweep of global history. No trade routes emerged, no colonies grew. The world didn't suddenly shrink, but others say the impact isn't always in the outcome. Sometimes it's in the idea that 500 years before cartographers redrew the globe, a group of farmers and fishermen found their way across the sea using sunstones and instinct, and came back alive. That matters, not because it changed the world immediately, but because it changed what the world could be. One story, often forgotten, is that of Leif's mother, Thujadhild. She was the first woman in Greenland to convert to Christianity. And when Leif returned from Norway with priests and wooden crosses, it was Thujadhild who pushed for the first church to be built on Greenlandic soil. She refused to sleep with her husband, Eric the Red, until he accepted the new faith. He never did, but Leif listened to her. Historians debate how sincere Leif's faith truly was, whether it was political, spiritual, or simply polite compliance. But the image of a Norse explorer not only bringing back tales of distant lands, but also building a chapel in his own icy village, adds a different texture to the myth. Not one of exploration, yes, but also of change, growth, softness, even in the hard world of Viking Age survival. So when children read about Leif today, it's not just about sailing or finding grapes. It's about listening, following, returning, and sometimes choosing not to go back, even when you could. The deeper one reads the sagas, the clearer it becomes. Leif Erikson's journey was not just one of discovery, but of restraint. He found a land rich with timber, mild in climate, generous in resources, yet he didn't take it. He didn't return with warships. He didn't send priests to baptize or soldiers to conquer. He told the tale. He gave the path. And then he stopped. In a world where most stories end in expansion, Leif's ends in silence. That silence unsettles modern minds. What did he really see? How far did he go? Were there more voyages than the sagas recorded? What did the indigenous peoples think of these strange bearded visitors in cloaks of wool and armor of mail? We don't know. Historians still debate the depth of interaction between the Norse and the indigenous peoples, especially the Beothuk and Micmac in modern-day Canada. The sagas describe short meetings, swift trades, and sudden violence. But they were written generations later in lands far away. How much is history? How much is drama? Archaeologists have found no evidence of lasting contact, no shared tools or blended languages. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The forests were vast, the encounters brief. 100 things could have been exchanged, stories, songs, gestures, and vanished. Like smoke over water. One curious detail remains. The Norse called the indigenous peoples Skrælings, but never described them as invaders. They feared them, yes, fought them. But the tone is different from how later European accounts describe native populations. The Vikings didn't see savages. They saw others, strong, strange, and rightfully territorial. Perhaps that's why Leif didn't return. He understood something the later colonizers never grasped. Not all land is meant to be taken. Some places are simply meant to be witnessed. There's a line in the saga of Eric the Red that's easily missed. When Leif lands in Vinland, he sends men to explore in all directions, but keeps some near the ship. So we always have a way home, he says. That's not fear. That's wisdom. Too often in history, explorers burn their ships committing fully to conquest. Leif kept his ready to sail. He knew the difference between arrival and ownership. Even his own family didn't understand that boundary. Freydis, his half-sister, led an expedition filled with ambition and bloodshed. She clashed with her fellow voyagers, ordered executions, and, according to one saga, killed 5 men with an axe while heavily pregnant. Whether this tale is exaggerated or not, it shows the contrast. Leif explored. Others fought. And perhaps the world wasn't ready for his kind of explorer. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, he planted flags. He enslaved. He extracted. His voyage marked the beginning of centuries of transformation, often violent, often irreversible. Leif did none of that. He left footprints, not chains. And so, ironically, his impact was softer, quieter, but no less real. It's easy to romanticize the Norse, easy to forget that they too were flawed. Their society was fierce, honor-bound, patriarchal, brutal in war. Yet Leif's story stands apart. He was raised by a father who fought exile with fists and fury. Yet he became the man who brought priests to Greenland and grapes to his people. He bridged worlds, between pagan and Christian, between cold and warmth, between myth and memory. And then he vanished from the pages. His death is never recorded. Just that he ruled after his father and that his son took his place. No saga ends with his funeral. No mound has been found. He simply fades, but fading is not forgetting. The wind carries the old stories longer than ink ever could. Across the Atlantic, in quiet coastal towns, Leif's name is still whispered, not as a conqueror, not even as a hero, but as a kind of question. A challenge to the familiar narrative. A gentle correction to history's loudest voices. He was never meant to be the centerpiece. Yet here he is. In textbooks, his name is often footnoted beside Columbus, as if tacked on at the last moment. Also, Leif Erikson may have reached America first, but it wasn't May. He did. The land was found. The voyage happened. And the sagas, once doubted, told the truth after all. There's something beautifully strange about that a story preserved by word of mouth, over freezing winters and roaring seas, survived. The centuries intact enough to point archaeologists to its very doorstep. Few civilizations are so precise. The Norse had no maps with latitude, no parchments full of coordinates. They had memory, oral tradition, pattern, experience, and with that, they found their way from fjord to forest to foreign coast. Leif's journey isn't just remarkable, it's impossible by most modern standards. And yet, he made it. Historians still debate what kind of leader he was. Some suggest he ruled Brattahlid with fairness. Others think his chieftainship was symbolic. There are no edicts, no monuments, no surviving codes of law, but maybe that was the point. He didn't leave behind systems. He left behind stories, and the people who remembered him, those who carved dragon-headed ships and whispered. Sagas by firelight carried that legacy forward with reverence, even in modern pop culture. Leif has found a strange second life. Cartoons, TV shows, and children's books cast him as the real discoverer of America. Viking helmets and adventure music. Smiling beards and waving oars. It's exaggerated, of course. But there's truth beneath the costume. The truth that not all explorers are made of steel and smoke. Some are made of silence and patience. There's another strange footnote in the sagas. They say that, after returning from Vinland, Leif earned the nickname Leif the Lucky, not because of the land he found, but because he rescued shipwrecked men on the way home. Some argued that it was that act, not the voyage, that earned him the most honor. Think about that. He found a new world, and still, his people remembered him more for saving others than for discovering anything. What does that say about their values? What does that say about ours? We build statues for conquerors. But Leif's statue on the hill above Reykjavik simply looks west, toward a land he saw once. A land that didn't keep him, but still remembers him. A land he never claimed, but touched. 1,000 years later, the grass grows thick over the long-abandoned camp at Lonzo Meadows. The wooden buildings have rotted, rebuilt only for tourists. The iron tools rusted away. The wild berries bloom in summer. The Atlantic crashes against the rocks like it always has. Nothing remains of Leif's voyage in the land itself. No coins, no carved runestones, no grand hall with his name etched into the walls. But the land remembers, not in words, but in quiet, and maybe that's enough. Leif Erikson's story is not one of domination, but of touch. Of a people arriving quietly, staying briefly, and returning home changed. It is a story outside the usual rhythm of exploration. No slaves taken, no lands renamed, no blood empire begun, and yet the distance he traveled across seas unknown to a place unmarked was no less staggering. Modern recreations of his voyage prove just how impossible it should have been. Tiny open-decked ships, fragile against storms. Navigation based on the sun, the color of water, and bird flight. No compass. No charts. Only courage. Only wind. And still, he made it. Historians still debate whether the Norse could have stayed longer or built something lasting. But to ask that is to miss the nature of the story. They weren't meant to stay. They were meant to show it could be done. The great journeys of history often bend toward empire, toward planting flags and drawing borders. Leif's didn't. It bent toward possibility, that the world was wider, that home was not the only answer, that other coasts waited. And in that, Leif gave the world something it didn't yet have proof. That people had reached across oceans before the age of exploration, before the rise of gunpowder and gold lust. Before the narrative was sealed. He opened a door. He didn't walk through it, but he left it ajar. And through that small gap, imagination followed. Cartographers dared redraw coastlines. Scholars dared redate first contact. Dreamers in coastal villages dared wonder if their ancestors had once touched other shores. The sagas say Leif died quietly, surrounded by kin. No saga ends with his last breath. No storm marked his passing. No angel descended, but somewhere, perhaps, the wind shifted, the stars adjusted, and a small echo traveled across water. Because Leif Erikson's journey didn't end in Vinland. It continues in every question we ask about the past. In every forgotten ruin. In every patch of earth that might mean more than it seems. He sailed with only stories to guide him. And now, 1,000 years later, it is story that keeps him alive. And if one listens, truly listens in the quiet moments between waves, that story still sails.